Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Because temperature regulation is an important function of the hypothalamus, so we will discuss the mechanism of temperature regulation by hypothalamic nuclei as a separate topic. And after that we will discuss the fever which results in infections. What is the mechanism for that? What is the reason for that? So first of all, mechanism of temperature regulation by hypothalamus. By hypothalamus. We know that there are two nuclei which control the temperature, two nuclei of the hypothalamus. So, anterior nucleus of hypothalamus and posterior nucleus of hypothalamus. Now, anterior nucleus of hypothalamus is sensitive to rise in temperature, rise in body temperature. While posterior nucleus of hypothalamus is sensitive to drop in body temperature. Thus, when the body temperature is high, the anterior nucleus is stimulated and anterior nucleus reduce body temperature. And when the temperature of the body drops down, the posterior temperature raises body temperature. So this is how these two hypothalamic nuclei try to regulate the body temperature. Now, how the anterior nucleus, when it is stimulated, in case when the body temperature is raised, then it reduces the body temperature. Reduce body temperature by usually two mechanisms. That is cutaneous vasodilatation. The cutaneous blood vessels, they are dilated. So when the cutaneous blood vessels are dilated, there is more blood flow and the temperature is evaporated and the temperature falls down. And second factor is sweating. Sweating reduce body temperature, and cutaneous vasodilatation also reduce body temperature. Then posterior nucleus. It is sensitive to drop in the body temperature. When the body temperature falls, then it is stimulated. And when the posterior nucleus is stimulated, it will rise the body temperature. How the posterior nucleus raises the body temperature? Again, by two mechanisms. Number one is shivering. And number two, cutaneous vasoconstriction. Shivering produces heat. In this way, body temperature is raised. While cutaneous vasoconstriction, constriction of the cutaneous blood vessels, they conserve body heat. So in this way, ultimately, here the body temperature falls. Body temperature is dropped down. And in case of posterior nucleus, when the body temperature falls, it raises the body temperature. And by these two mechanisms, the posterior nucleus the body temperature is raised. Now this is how the hypothalamic nuclei, the anterior hypothalamus, particularly the anterior nucleus, and posterior hypothalamus, that is the posterior nucleus, mainly regulate the body temperature. Now I will draw a simple diagram which will explain the summary of the mechanism of body temperature by the hypothalamic nuclei. And this diagram will also help you to rapidly know about the mechanism of body temperature, especially before viva, and your time will be spared for other topics. Now, inside is hypothalamus. Suppose this is hypothalamus. This is frontal pole. This is occipital pole. Now, suppose this is anterior nucleus of hypothalamus, and this is posterior nucleus of hypothalamus. And this is anterior nucleus. Of hypothalamus. Now, anterior nucleus. Anterior nucleus is as I told you before, is sensitive to rise in body temperature. Sensitive to rise in body temperature. So when the body temperature rises, anterior nucleus is stimulated. And when the anterior nucleus stimulated, it tries to lower the body temperature. Try to lower the body temperature by two mechanisms. By two mechanisms, that is by sweating. And by cutaneous vasodilatation. And these two will result in drop in body temperature. This was the role of anterior nucleus of the thalamus to regulate body temperature. That is because it is sensitive to body temperature. When the body temperature rises, it is stimulated, and by two mechanisms it tries to drop the body temperature. Number one, by sweating, and number two, by cutaneous vasodilatation. With the result, the body temperature is dropped down. Now, when there is a lesion of the anterior nucleus, of hypothalamus, hypothalamus. The anterior nucleus will be depressed. Is inhibited. With the result, the posterior nucleus is activated. Posterior nucleus is unlocked. And it is stimulated. And because the posterior nucleus raises body temperature, function of the posterior nucleus is raising the body temperature. Therefore, it will result in hyperthermia. This occurs when there is lesion. Now, posterior nucleus of hypothalamus. Posterior hypothalamus, as I told you, it is sensitive to drop in body temperature. Posterior nucleus is sensitive to drop in the body temperature. When the body temperature is reduced, the posterior nucleus is stimulated. Now, when the posterior nucleus is stimulated, it tries to raise the body temperature. How? Again by two mechanisms. When the body temperature is dropped, posterior nucleus is stimulated, and the posterior nucleus then raises the body temperature. How? By cutaneous vasodilatation. By cutaneous vasodilation. And by shivering. Now the shearing produce heat. In this way, body temperature is raised, while cutaneous vasodilatation conserve body heat. So with the help of these two mechanisms, the body temperature is raised. In this way, body temperature is raised. So this is how these two nuclei try to regulate body temperature. When there is a lesion of the posterior nucleus, when it is damaged, what will happen? Lesion of posterior nucleus. Because posterior nucleus raises the body temperature, but in case of lesion, instead of rising body temperature will fall. Lesion of body temperature, posterior nucleus is inhibited. Normally, the posterior nucleus raises body temperature. So when it is inhibited, it will result in lowering of the blood pressure, that is hypothermia. Thus, when the posterior nucleus is damaged, it is inhibited. Therefore, the anterior nucleus will become activated, and the anterior nucleus will raise its body temperature. It will lower the body temperature. Therefore, the body temperature falls, and it results in hypothermia. So this is just a summary of temperature regulation. By this simple diagram, you can save your time and you can easily understand how the body temperature is controlled and what occur in effects of lesions of anterior nucleus and posterior nucleus. Now, why the body temperature is raised in cases of infection? Why there is fever in case of infection? Why there is fever? In case of infection, there is a anterior commissure, then there is lamina terminalis, optic chiasma, and the other parts, tuber cinereum, pituitary gland. And right and left mammillary bodies. Etc. Section through the midbrain is hypothalamic sulcus. And in the inferior part of the lateral was the third ventricle. The hypothalamus. Now here in the lamina terminalis there are blood vessels. These blood vessels are known as organum, vasculosum, laminae, terminalis. Appears to be a difficult terminology. Organism, organ, organum, not organism, organum, derived from organ. Which type of organ? A vascular organ, vasculosum. And as it is located in the lamina terminalis, called laminae terminalis. This bunch of blood vessel in the lamina terminalis. Organum, vasculosum, laminae terminalis. There is a very important feature of this bunch of blood vessel located in the lamina terminalis. What is that? Here, blood-brain barrier is absent. There is no blood-brain barrier. So in cases of infection, there is decomposition of the tissues. And this material is in the form of toxins or pyrogens. These toxins are released in blood circulation. And through blood, this toxin reaches the organum vasculosum, located in the lamina terminalis. And as there is no blood-brain barrier in organum vasculosum, therefore these toxins, they become in contact from blood. They toxins become in contact with dendrites of neurons of anterior nucleus. Of hypothalamus. These toxins are pyrogens. They become in contact with the dendrites of the neurons of anterior nucleus of the hypothalamus. And you know that the anterior nucleus, it drops the body temperature. Normally, anterior nucleus drop body temperature. Normally the anterior nucleus drop the body temperature. But when these pyrogens, they become in contact with the dendrites of the neurons of anterior nucleus, the body temperature will not drop down, therefore it will result in fever. Also known as pyrexia. This is how, in cases of infection, there is fever. So again I will repeat, in the lamina terminalis of brain there is a bunch of blood vessels. It has a special name, organum vasculosum lamini terminalis. The important feature of this these blood vessels in the lamina terminalis is that there is no blood-brain barrier. So in cases of infection, there will be circulating toxins and pathogens in the blood. And these toxins, when reach the organum vasculosum, they will enter into the anterior nucleus of hypothalamus. Suppose this is the anterior nucleus of hypothalamus. So these organisms, they will become the toxins will easily enter the anterior nucleus, and they will become in contact with the dendrites of the neurons of anterior nucleus. Therefore, the anterior nucleus become ineffective to drop the body temperature. With the result, the posterior nucleus is activated, and as posterior nucleus raises the body temperature, therefore it will result in fever. So this is the reason of fever in case of infection. Now just to summarize, the reason of fever or rise in the body temperature when there is infection. Now, what is the reason? The reason is infection. This is the reason for the cause for fever in cases of infection. Then, what are the different parts of the brain, components, the apparatus? Which is involved, what are the different components? Number one, the organum vasculosum lamini terminalis. Organum vasculosum is one part which is involved in this process that is developed, that is the fever in response to infection. Now, what is the location of this organism? It is in the lamina terminalis. And second, what is its special feature of organum vasculosum, that is no blood-brain barrier. This is the special feature of this organum vasculosum. This is just summary of the organum vasculosum. Then the other component is the anterior nucleus. Anterior nucleus of hypothalamus. The anterior nucleus of the hypothalamus. And the other one is posterior nucleus of hypothalamus. So posterior nucleus, raises body temperature. And anterior nucleus, it drops the body temperature, is inhibited. Because as I told you, the toxin become in contact with its dendrites, so it is inhibited. Therefore, body temperature will not be reduced. Posterior nucleus is active, it is stimulated when the anterior nucleus is not working. Therefore, body temperature will raise. These were the components of different brain tissues which are activated and some are depressed in case of the fever in response to infection. So, organum vasculosum, number 2, anterior nucleus which is inhibited, and posterior nucleus which is activated. And organum vasculosum it has a special feature that there is no blood-brain barrier. Therefore, toxins easily cross it to enter the nervous tissue, that is the hypothalamus, which part of the anterior nucleus. These were the apparatuses involved in fever. So, what are the factors involved here? And toxins. Or pathogens. Or defectors which inhibit the anterior nucleus, which cross the blood-brain barrier from organum vasculosum, from general circulation to the organum vasculosum, and from the blood vessel of organum vasculosum in the laminar terminalis. Because there is no blood-brain barrier, so easily these bacteria will enter the anterior nucleus and will make the anterior nucleus inhibited. And the posterior nucleus is not affected, and the function of the posterior nucleus is to raise body temperature. Therefore, the posterior nucleus will be active. So these were different factors involved in this. And what this factor will do, inhibit the anterior nucleus. Anterior nucleus is inhibited. Posterior nucleus is activated. Stimulated. And what will be the result? Result will be fever, pyrexia. So this is just summary why there is a fever in cases of infection. So in today's lecture we talk about the mechanism of temperature regulation, and with the help of this useful diagram, this process is summarized, and it will be very easy for revision to save the time just before the viva. And second, the question that why there is fever in case of infection, what is the reason for it? It is explained with the help of this summary, why there is fever in case of infection. So thank you very much.